Artful Eddie lacked nothing. Artful Eddie was one of the roars of the Roaring Twenties. He was one of the slickest and slimiest lawyers you ever saw. Artful Eddie was Al Capone's lawyer. And Al Capone put him in charge of all of his dog racing tracks. And Artful Eddie discovered the scam of overfeeding 6 of the dogs and betting on the 7th. Artful Eddie made millions. He had wealth and power and style. So why did he turn himself into the feds? Why did he risk sure reprisal from the mob hitmen? Well, you see, Eddie had a son. And Eddie had spent his entire life with despicable people. But he wanted more for his son. He wanted to give his son the only thing he had that was still worth giving. He wanted to give his son the most important thing he could. He wanted to give him a name. And to give his son a name, he had to clear his own. And so he turned state's evidence, and he paid the price. 2 shotgun blasts made sure of that. Artful Eddie never saw his son grow up, but he gave his son one of the most well-known names in the entire world. But before we talk about that name, let's talk about the principle. Let's talk about risky love. Love that takes a chance. Love that goes out on a limb. Love that leaves a legacy. Sacrificial, unexpected, surprising, stirring acts of love which are never forgotten. Let's talk about Simon the leper's act of risky love. Oh, he just had someone over for dinner, that's all. But we know that lepers were not allowed in public, and that the public was not certainly allowed to eat with them. We can infer from the story that Simon was one of those healed lepers, healed by Jesus, whose life had been changed. Well, which leper was he? Was he one of the 10 that Jesus healed along the side of the road and told to go in and pay an offering to the temple, and only one of them returned to say thank you? Maybe that one was Simon the leper. Perhaps he was the leper that Jesus healed on the road to Capernaum. Or maybe he was one of the countless others that Jesus healed whose story was lost on the cutting room floor of the gospel writer's office. Whoever he was, we know that Jesus touched his life in an amazing way. You see, he had Jesus over to dinner, a simple act, but it meant a lot to Jesus in this last week of his life. But it wasn't only a simple act, it was a risky act. You see, Jesus was a wanted man. And it takes a lot of nerve to have a wanted man to your home for dinner. It takes even more nerve, however, to place your hand on the sores of a leopard. The sores of a leper, open wounds. And Jesus placed his hands on them and healed them. And where there was once a nub was now a finger for his daughter to hold on to. Where there was once sores and scars was now a smooth back for his wife to caress. And where before he had been quarantined outside of town, he was now able to be in his own home with those he loved. No, Simon would never forget what Jesus had done for him. But Jesus would visit other homes during this last week of his life. He would visit the high priest's home, the nicest home in all of Israel, up on a hill with a view of the temple. But the only view that Jesus would see while he was there was a view of those bearing false witness against him. He'd visit Herod's chambers, the castle of the puppet king, And there'd be food and dancing and celebrations, and yet none of it would be offered to Jesus. Herod would ask for a trick. "Do us a miracle, country boy," and the guards would laugh. Well, Jesus would visit Pilate's home, the home of the governor of all the Holy Land, Caesar's ambassador to the area. It should have been a memorable event, and yet it was a time in the world which most folks would rather forget. You see, God was in Pilate's house, and Pilate didn't even recognize him. But Simon did. Simon recognized when God was in his home. You see, risky love seizes the moment, and Jesus remembered. Well, what about extravagant gestures? What about this woman's extravagant gesture towards Jesus? John's gospel identifies her as Mary, the sister of Martha and the sister of Lazarus. Jesus also remembered Mary's gesture. It would be hard to forget. The aroma faded slowly. It was 12 ounces of imported, sweet, oily perfume, concentrated perfume, a smell that filled the room and mixed with the lamb and the vegetables, a perfume that would last for days. Mary was the only one who believed him when he talked of his death. You see, he spoke with a firmness that she'd heard before on the road to Jerusalem when Jesus stood before the tomb and yelled, "Lazarus, come out!" And as Mary hugged the now warm body of her once dead brother, she looked over his shoulder to see the tear-streaked face of Jesus smiling. In her heart, she knew that she would never doubt his words. She always believed Jesus. And when he spoke of his death, she believed him. And when she saw these three together, she knew it was time. Simon, the healed leper, Lazarus, the raised corpse, and Jesus, the source of life for all of them. She knew it was time to act. But it wasn't an impulsive act. She'd been saving the jar for a long time, perhaps for her entire life. Perhaps it was a customary gift that was given to a child at the time of birth to be used for their own burial. It wasn't impulsive because she had to bring this heavy alabaster bottle all the way from home. But it was an extravagant gift. Its value was an entire year's wages. It was perhaps the only valuable thing that she owned. And she poured it out on his head, an entire bottle, filling his clothes with a sweet aroma, cooling his skin. Between the soldiers' lashings on that Friday afterwards, did he remember how that oil had cooled his skin? On his skin, the fragrance of faith. In his clothing, the balm of belief. And as the soldiers tore his garments on that Good Friday afternoon, the aroma brought a bouquet to the cemetery. The other disciples mocked her. "Why waste that money? We could use the money to feed the poor, don't you know?" All puffed up in their pride. But Jesus comes quickly to her defense. "You'll always have the poor with you, and you can feed them whenever you feel like it. But she has done a beautiful thing for me." You see, there's a time for extravagant gestures. There's a time for risky love. And when the time comes, we need to seize the moment. Don't miss it. A young wife looks into the jewelry case. Oh, he'd really love to have that watch. But he's a practical man. He understands that we can't really afford it. I'll be able to buy it for him someday. A boy watches as kids taunt a smaller one, and he's angry. He's angry because that little boy is his brother. but those doing the taunting are his friends. What would they think of me if I interrupt them? He thinks to himself. So he walks away. I'll stand up to them someday. A young husband is packing his wife's belongings. She passed away far too young, he thinks to himself, and as he is going through her things, he finds a negligee still in a box, never worn. She was saving it for something special. She'd wear it someday. Someday. That word hisses as it comes off our lips, and you know the truth before I even say it. Some days never come. Sometimes the price of practicality is higher than the cost of risky love and extravagant gestures. But the rewards of extravagant gestures and risky love are always higher than its costs. Go to the effort, invest the time, buy the gift, take the trip, do it now. Seized opportunity renders joy. Lost opportunity brings regret. The reward for Simon was great. He gave rest and comfort to the one who made heaven and earth. No, Simon's gesture will never be forgotten, and neither will Mary's. Jesus said it himself, wherever the gospel is preached throughout the entire world, what she did for me will be remembered. Which brings us back to Artful Eddie, the gangster gone good, who squealed on Al Capone so that his son Butch could have a name. He would have been very proud of Butch if he had lived. He would have been very proud of his appointment to Annapolis. He would have been very proud of his commissioning as a World War II Navy pilot. He would have been very proud of Butch downing 5 enemy fighters, saving countless lives on the carrier Lexington. Artful Eddie's name was cleared. The Congressional Medal of Honor made sure of that. And when people in Chicago say the name O'Hare, they don't think about gangster lawyers. They think about aviation heroism. And now when you think of his name, you'll have something even more to think about. About a gangster gone good who gave his life for his son's opportunity. And during this Holy Week, take the opportunity to think about other extravagant gestures of risky love. Think about what Simon did for Jesus. Think about what Mary did that will never be forgotten. And finally, think about the ultimate act of extravagant gestures and risky love when Jesus sacrificed himself on the cross.